All right, guys. So today we're looking at day 4 of PFT 118. We are going through the nervous and the endocrine systems today. So this will be the end of our kinetic chain plus a little bit extra on hormones. I will say we teach hormones here at Sochi kind of similar to the way NASM teaches hormones, which is pretty brief, pretty darn summarized. We are not going to spend quite as much time on it as you certainly can. And I definitely don't consider myself an expert on hormones. Hormones are actually one of the more complicated kind of parts of the body, just because of how that signaling works and how their production works and what they do and things like that. But we definitely have some parts of it that are relevant to us. So we will talk about them a little bit. But primarily today, we're going to spend our time on the nervous system, which is really fun. Love the nervous system. Always kind of interesting to see how it works. We're going to look at 2 videos detailing that today, where we're going to look at not only how like the nervous system functions as cells, like we will look at the microbiology and things like that. Microanatomy. But then we will also look at how we generate the action potentials, which are the electrochemical signals that we use to do literally everything that we do. Everything that we do to move around is like a signal that's generated by our nervous system. So understanding how those signals are coordinated and stuff is definitely a big part of what we do. I will say that when we start talking about those action potentials, it gets a little nitty gritty, a little bit detailed. You're really not going to be tested on that, just so you guys know. But I love like kind of going through it, just because it's a really good way to kind of give you a very clear picture of what's going on. And then I feel like that gives you a better, just sort of natural instinctive understanding of how exercises work, and stabilization and maximum strength and things like that, sort of how those things kind of come together when we get down to things later. But are you going to need to know every single detail of how a sodium and a potassium pump works and does the thing? Probably not. That's a little bit over detailed for what we need. So I don't think I have quite as much about it in the notes, but we will watch. I'm actually checking right now to make sure that I'm not lying. Yeah, not so much of that in the notes, but we will kind of like watch a fun video on it. So speaking of videos, let's go ahead and start with our first one here. Elijah Wood on Hot Ones? Yes. I'll be watching that after class today. Crash course nervous system. That's part 2. I want part 1. I guess that's it.
With Home Chef Fast and Fresh, all you need is a microwave or oven, and just
James with the help.
Oh yeah, this episode's cool. Where's my share sound button? There we go. All right, here we go.
James was a healthy professional, a father of 2. He had lots of friends, loved telling jokes, and played softball on Sundays. And one day, at the age of 45, he suffered a stroke. He bounced back fairly quickly, with one major exception. He was no longer able to speak. The stroke damaged a specific area in the left hemisphere of his brain called Broca's area and left him with what's known as Broca's aphasia. Broca's area is partly responsible for the ability to produce and process language, and Broca's aphasia often leaves its sufferers with some ability to understand speech, but an inability to produce intelligible words. James could understand his wife when she asked if he wanted cereal for breakfast, but he could only respond by repeating the word "to," although he could still intonate as though he were speaking a whole sentence. Then, after some time in therapy, something rather unexpected happened. James regained some ability to communicate. through singing. Broca's aphasia can sometimes be treated by teaching patients to sing, because singing uses a different region of the brain, one that's on the right side and that's analogous to Broca's area on the left. So after some practice, James could sing words, and he eventually relearned how to talk by teaching the right side of his brain to speak rather than sing. Whether it's a stroke affecting your speech, a tumor destroying your memory, a concussion affecting your aggression, or that fateful iron rod that shot straight through Phineas Gage's skull, a lot of what we know about how the brain works has come through studying injuries to it. And what we've learned so far is that even though it looks like a 1.4 kilogram lump of gray congealed oatmeal, the brain is made up of super specific areas that have super specific functions. You might actually say the same thing about your brain that's sometimes said about politics. Everything is local. You'll remember that our nervous system is divided into two main networks that work in harmony. The central nervous system, consisting of your amazing brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, made up of the nerves coming out of that central nervous system. The central nervous system's main game is integrating the sensory information that the peripheral system collects from all over the body and responding to it by coordinating both conscious and unconscious activity. The sun is bright, so I'll shade my eyes. I'm hungry, so I'm calling the pizza man. The phone is ringing, maybe I'll answer it. All these sensations, thoughts, and directions processed through this two-part system. It's the brain, of course, that sorts out all that sensory information and gives orders. It also carries out your most complex functions, like thinking and feeling and remembering. Meanwhile, your spinal cord conducts two-way signals between your brain and the rest of your body, while also governing basic muscle reflexes and patterns that don't need your brain's blessing to work. This is how a chicken can still run around even if the poor thing has been decapitated. Both your spinal cord and brain are made of fragile, jelly-like nervous tissue that is extremely susceptible to injury. So all that goo is well protected by the bones of your vertebrae and cranium, as well as membrane layers, or meninges, before being bathed in a cushy waterbed of clear cerebrospinal fluid. This fluid actually allows your brain to float somewhat in your skull, reducing its weight and letting it slosh around while you and your head are free to move. But even with all that extra protection, your brain is still vulnerable, and one thing that James's story taught us is that its vulnerabilities can be incredibly specific, because your brain is divided into specialized regions that may or may not interact with each other to produce a given action. We can better understand this division of labor by looking at how the brain first develops into its main component parts. Inside a developing embryo, the central nervous system starts off as a humble little neural tube. Soon, the caudal, or lower end of the tube, stretches out, forming the spinal cord, while the cranial end begins to expand, divide, and enlarge into three primary brain vesicles, or interconnected chambers. This is kind of your proto-brain. We call these chambers the prosencephalon, the mesencephalon, and the rhombencephalon, or forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. By an embryo's 5th week of development, these main three chambers start morphing into 5 secondary vesicles that essentially form the roots of what will become your grown-up brain structures. The prosencephalon divides into 2 sections, the telencephalon and the diencephalon. The rhombencephalon forms into another pair called the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. And in between, the mesencephalon, thanks to evolution, remains undivided. The real action starts as these 5 secondary vesicles start developing into the major adult brain regions that you might be more familiar with: the brainstem, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, also known as the interbrain, and finally the cerebral hemispheres. But in order to go from a simple tube into that classic wrinkly icon we think of as the brain, each of these 5 vesicles grows in different ways. Basically, some develop a lot more than others. The least dramatic changes occur in the 3 most caudal, or lower sections: the mesencephalon, the metencephalon, and the myelencephalon. They go on to form the cerebellum, which mostly helps coordinate muscular activity, and the brainstem, which plays a vital role in relaying information between the body and the higher regions of the brain. The brainstem actually has 3 main components, and I know this is getting to be a lot of vocabulary here. You have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Together, they regulate many of the most basic vital involuntary functions, like keeping your heart on pace, keeping your lungs working, and controlling things like sleep and appetite and pain sensitivity and awareness. But of the 3 brainstem parts, it's your midbrain that carries out the higher level functions. Like when your eyes track a fast-moving object, or when you look behind you after hearing some sudden loud sound, it's the midbrain that receives and processes that sensory information and sends out the reflexive motor signals so you react without thinking. The midbrain also passes that data to regions like the cerebral cortex, which do the actual conscious thinking about the stimuli, like, what is that thing whizzing across the sky, or what just exploded behind me? So with the brainstem and the cerebellum covering your basic life life and motor functions, you start to see somewhat more complex tasks being carried out in the next major brain structure, the diencephalon. This is where you find the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, and the mammillary bodies, which regulate things like homeostasis, alertness, and reproductive activity. Here we also find part of the limbic system, which is a center for strong emotions, like fear. This area is sometimes called the reptilian brain because we share it with some of our less philosophical animal brethren like lizards and fish. I'm not putting these guys down, but by our standards, they don't think so much as focus on the more instinctual pursuits that are ruled by the caudal regions of the brain: eat, drink, sleep, mate, stay safe. All those things are awesome, but it wasn't until the appearance of birds and mammals that some animals' brains came to be dominated by the last of the 5 vesicles, the telencephalon. During your brain's growth, the telencephalon undergoes the biggest changes of all as it develops into the most brainy part of your brain, the 2 classic walnut-looking hemispheres we collectively call the cerebrum that cover the rest of your brain like a mushroom cap on its stalk. That's the cerebrum, not to be confused with Cerebro, which is Professor X's telepathy-enhancing device, and it is the largest region of the brain and performs the highest functions. It's made up of the wrinkled outer layer of gray matter called the cerebral cortex and the inner squishy layer of white matter beneath it. And it's the cerebrum that rules our voluntary movements and our most advanced tricks, like thinking and learning and regulating and recognizing emotions and experiencing consciousness in general. You'll remember that higher processing requires lots of synapses, which require lots of nervous tissue, so as the cerebrum grew through evolutionary time, it got more massive. But our skull didn't exactly keep up. So in order to squeeze all that material into your skull, the brain forms little creases called gyri and larger grooves, or sulci, giving it more folds than an origami pineapple. And although a big fissure separates the left and right hemispheres, the 2 halves communicate through a series of myelinated axon fibers called the corpus callosum. And each hemisphere has other smaller fissures that divide it into lobes, each with a different set of major functions. The frontal lobe, for example, governs muscle control and cognitive functions like planning for the future, concentration, and preventing socially unacceptable behaviors. In most people, this area doesn't finish developing until after the teenage years, which tells you a lot about the teenage years. Since Broca's area lives in this lobe in the left hemisphere, it also is important in language comprehension and speech. If you're enjoying a beautiful sunset, you can thank your occipital lobe at the back of your head for processing those bright visual cues. And the next time you step on a Lego, you can curse your parietal lobe, which processes the sensations of touch, pain, and pressure. Meanwhile, the temporal lobe helps sort out auditory information, including language. It contains Wernicke's area, another important region of the brain associated with the production of written and spoken language. This part of the limbic system includes your short-term memory keeper, the hippocampus, and the emotional amygdala, which controls sexual and social behavior. So if you damage the wrong part of your temporal lobe, you may never again be able to remember what you ate for lunch, or you might suddenly become a total jerk who kicks kittens and cuts in line. We could do a whole course on the finer-grained functions and consequences of malfunction in every bit of brain in your gourd, but, well, we can't do that today. And you gotta remember that when it comes to your body, no organ or system is an island. Your brain would be pretty useless if it weren't hooked up to the outside world. That's where the peripheral nervous system comes in, which we'll be spending the next few lessons exploring. Meanwhile, you learned today about the central nervous system and how important location is to brain function. We looked at how the brain develops from an unassuming neural tube into 3 primary vesicles and then 5 secondary vesicles, and finally into our complex set of 4 adult structures and their basic functions. Crash Course is now on Patreon. Thank you so much to all of our supporters on Patreon who help make Crash Course possible for themselves and for everyone else in the world through their monthly contributions. If you like Crash Course and you want to help us keep making great new videos like this one, you can check out patreon.com/crashcourse. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, the script was edited by Blake DiPestino, and our consultant is Dr. Brandon Jackson. It was directed by Nicholas Jenkins and Michael Aranda, and our graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of pieces there that are not, I mean, we don't necessarily need to study the different hemispheres of the brain, but what is important to us is understanding how different parts of our brain control different parts of everything that we do. So like we have 3 sort of primary functions when it comes to our nervous system and how they work. Understanding like those functions is big. So oh no, there we go. So let's go ahead and break it down, right? So we're going to be looking at today the structural divisions of the nervous system, it's kind of like we talked a little bit about in that video. And then we'll also look at the functional divisions. So we'll not only look at like, what the pieces are, but also like what pieces do what work. Then we'll talk about neurons and break those down, going into actual like nerve cells and, talking about that. We'll look at the nervous system as it is actually functioning, talking about like how impulses work and action potentials, how we create those electrochemical signals, synapses and neurotransmitters, which we touched on a little bit yesterday. We talked about the neuromuscular junction. That's where nerve cells are zapping muscle cells. Well, we'll look at today about like how nerve cells zap other nerve cells, or maybe an organ, or a gland or whatever. Then we'll look at our different nerves that we've got, although this will be pretty quick. The really big thing that we're going to spend time on is reflexes. But we won't talk too much about like dermatomes and structures and things, hones and tracts and stuff. But we will talk about reflexes, which are really, really cool, especially because like these are super relevant to us when it comes to explosive plyometric movements and things like that. And then the clinical aspect, we're not really going to kind of go over that. And then the same thing with the ANS. We're not going to spend too much time on the autonomic stuff, although we will mention the divisions of it. So looking at our nervous system, right? By definition, we're going to say it is a control system for the body. Its job is to coordinate all of your body systems. I mean, everything runs through your nervous system. It doesn't only use your nervous system to run things. I mean, we also have our endocrine system, which is like all of your hormones and glands and things like that. That's also a control system. But it's kind of under the control of the nervous system. So really, it's like, yeah, your nervous system's the head honcho, it's the communication network within your body. That's the definition we're actually going to use tomorrow. But its job is to not only detect stimuli, but also to respond to it. If you touch your hand to like a stove that's on, we need to be able to like get information in that's like, guess what? That's really, really hot, and then we also need to be able to be like, well, last time we told something this was hot, we got a really bad burn. And so what we should do is we should contract the bicep muscles to draw the arm away, right? And so your body kind of knows like how to coordinate that signal. So like an information piece comes in, your nervous system goes, that's not good, right? And then makes a decision, which is to move your hand away. And then it sends a signal back to actually move that hand. So your nervous system is very much a communication network because it's information going in both directions. And it uses nerves and tracts and things like that to carry these messages around. So looking at our nervous system, we are going to have two primary divisions. We talked a little bit about this in the video. You are going to have your central and your peripheral nervous systems. So I'm actually going to kind of get a chart going here, just because I like to make a flow chart for this whenever I'm talking about it. Let's see here. And I need that. So the two primary divisions of your nervous system are your central nervous system. Let's make that substantially larger. That's a little bit too big. That'll work. So the two primary divisions are going to be your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. And so those two primary divisions are responsible for doing all of the communicating, right? Like this is, like I said, like there's information going out and there's information coming in. And so these systems are going to be what is responsible for that. And so they're kind of working together. Now, your peripheral nervous system is going to divide down. That's going to divide down into some smaller divisions because if your central system is the decision maker, your peripheral system is all the stuff that's sort of gathering info and executing responses. So when we're looking at how we divide this, right, the central system is responsible for coordinating signals. And that is your brain and your spinal cord, right? And then your peripheral nervous system is responsible for carrying out those coordinated signals from the central system. They carry things out throughout the body. They either detect stuff or they respond to stuff. And this is going to be your cranial and spinal nerve. So when we look at these two divisions here, you can actually see how they kind of branch out, right? Oh, somebody made the flow chart that I'm going to make. So there's the brain and there's the spinal cord. There's the central system. And then all the nerves that branch out from that are covering the rest of the body. These are all of your peripheral nerves here. And then there's some on top of your skull as well, which we call cranial nerves, but we can't train those. I mean, I guess you can do stuff like that. But for the most part, we've got all these peripheral nerves running throughout our body. You can see some of them are, located where our vital organs are, and their job is to coordinate signals in the digestive system and cardiovascular system and things like that. And then there's ones that branch down and control our limbs, our arms and legs and stuff. So those are our two primary divisions there, right? Now that's going to divide down, and there you can see them, right? There's the brain and the spinal cord, and then there's all the peripheral nerves branching out from there. So when you think about like the functions of your nervous system, if we start dividing this down, like I said, your peripheral nervous system is going to interact with all of these peripheral parts of your body. It's how your brain is able to kind of get information to stuff that your brain is not directly wired to, and so you've got, let's say, skeletal muscle, right? Let's say I want to like contract my bicep. Well, we can actually kind of look and see what nerves are responsible for that. So it would start in my brain, it would travel down my spinal cord until it finds its exit. And then it's going to get off on bicep 405. I don't know. I was trying to make a 405 joke, but it's going to exit right there and then go down to where it needs to go. And it's going to zap that muscle. It's going to recruit that muscle. And that's going to cause, my elbow to flex. Or to extend or to do whatever, right? And so that is where we have two primary divisions within our nervous system, because there's the thing that I just described, which is a very conscious, voluntary, I chose to bend my elbow, right? That is what we refer to as your somatic nervous system. So the somatic system is a division of the peripheral system, and it's responsible for voluntary control, like my biceps, right? Or doing squats or running or whatever. Talking right now is somatic, right? But at the same time, my heart is beating, and it has been like kind of nonstop. Resting heart rate's relatively low. If I were to start standing up and be a little bit more animated, suddenly I would need more energy. I would need to deliver more oxygen and more nutrients to those muscles. And so then like my heart's going to need to beat a little bit faster. And so it's going to elevate a little bit, right? And it's going to, match the sort of like workload to whatever it is I happen to be doing. And I don't want to have to think about that, right? Like it's a good thing we don't have to be constantly like, don't forget, beat your heart beating. And I'm teaching this lecture right now, heart beating. Imagine if you just had to like consciously think about that the entire time, right? Like, it would be pretty freaking difficult. Like, our nerve, we would be completely overwhelmed. So luckily we have this division here, which is the autonomic nervous system. And this is the involuntary part of our nervous system that controls things like smooth muscles, like your organs, cardiac muscle, like your heart, and then different glands, like in your endocrine system that we're going to talk about later today. That's all of the areas that are responsible for, involuntary, sort of automatic stuff. And that's what we call the autonomic nervous system. So if we divide this down into two major categories, we are going to have the somatic nervous system. I'll make that a little bit. I go this way. And we'll put that here. And then we are going to have the autonomic nervous system. So this kind of divides down, like you can see right here, right? Now, those two primary divisions, they are sort of dealing with the peripheral nervous system. Your central nervous system doesn't have much of a direct contact with either of these. It uses the peripheral system to do that. That's why these two are lateral here, whereas these two are like, kind of separate branches, right? So your speech patterns, your exercising, all of that is very somatic. That's all the stuff that we have voluntary control over. But when we look at like the autonomic side of things, that's the involuntary stuff. And there's some semi-voluntary stuff. If it's semi-voluntary, that falls under the somatic system as well. Like blinking your eyes, for instance, right? Like that's something that kind of happens naturally that you kind of forget about, or even like breathing's a really good example. Like you are going to breathe naturally, but at the same time, like you can also somatically control your breathing and purposefully breathe in and stuff. So because of that, it's sort of different parts of it are being controlled by different parts of your nervous system. You have somatic control over certain muscles, but certain muscles are also, autonomically controlled every now and then. And that, by the way, just as a fun little, thing to talk about, sometimes there is autonomic reactions that happen in our muscles and we don't want them to. I'm sure you guys have experienced, like if you've ever been exercising or something afterwards and you experience that twitching that sometimes happens, that's you're like, hey, stop it. Like that is little bits of your nervous system firing when it really kind of shouldn't. So then the autonomic nervous system, this is the stuff that's involuntary. So sometimes we think that we need to talk about that less, but honestly, like this controls your heart. It controls, like I said, your glands and everything. It's a really important control system within the body. So it's a big part of our jobs to make sure that, we are both training somatically, muscles and, working on bone density and things like that. But we are also taking advantage of like how the autonomic nervous system is going to function as it should. And so your autonomic system, that involuntary stuff, that's going to divide down into two primary divisions here, whether it's your sympathetic or your parasympathetic nervous system. So we're going to see the sympathetic nervous system, and that division is responsible for kind of freaking out about stuff. That's really like, that's what we refer to as like the fight or flight system. But then we have your parasympathetic nervous system, and that's the system that's kind of responsible for calming you down after something might happen, right? Wow. So those are kind of the two directions that we're going to sort of travel in, right? We're either going to travel to, freaking out, or travel to calming down when it comes to the nervous system, right? And so those are our divisions. It starts in the central nervous system, then peripheral, and then that's going to choose whether or not it's, something that you have voluntary control over, or if it's involuntary control. If it's involuntary control, it needs to decide, all right, well, are we amping something up? Are we increasing the intensity of that thing, or are we decreasing it, right? So for instance, if we look at like hormones, like adrenaline, right? That is very much your autonomic sympathetic nervous system activating. And so this is the fight or flight mechanism. That's often what the system is referred to. It's responsible for kind of turning things up, even just like, let's say like you walk outside, it's really, really, really cold out and you start shivering, right? Even that is a little bit of like the sympathetic system, because your body's like, wow, yeah, it's really cold. We need to do something to kind of amp things up, right? Whereas like when you start to get to the end of the night and you're starting to kind of fall asleep and you're getting a little tired, right? That is where your parasympathetic nervous system is kind of turning off certain parts of your body making you kind of sleepy, trying to get you into rest and digest mode. So you'll sometimes hear those terms describing those two divisions. You'll sometimes hear fight or flight when we're describing the sympathetic nervous system, and you will sometimes hear rest and digest when we are talking about the parasympathetic nervous system. So when you calm down, for instance, for me, I got really bad road rage. So like when I get really upset behind the wheel of a car, sometimes my sympathetic nervous system is producing adrenaline and cortisol and all these like stress hormones. And then like, once I get to where I'm going, it's like, I'm good. I'm calm, and that's my parasympathetic nervous system kind of stepping in saying like, hey, we made it. We're on time. There's no reason to freak out. So those are these sort of autonomic sections there, right? So when we're looking at like how we are regulating things in the autonomic nervous system, because that's the thing, like I said, we spend a lot of time training the somatic nervous system, but there's a lot of autonomic stuff that we have positive effects on through exercise. It's like, do you want to consciously think about how to do like every single movement in a squat, or do you want to kind of naturally move through it the way that you are sort of designed, right? That's where like, yeah, we are trying to kind of get to this place of like, autonomic regulation. And so your autonomic, system regulates things like glands, your smooth muscles, hollow organs like organs that are responsible for like producing certain materials, blood vessels, and the heart, all of those things regulated by that sympathetic or parasympathetic, like if I told you guys, guess what, Faye, Thomas, Lorianne, we got a pop quiz today, and it's going to be worth the entirety of your grade here in PFT 118. If I said something like that, you'd probably be like, yeah, the heart's probably going to pick up a pace a little bit, right? It gets a little nervous. That is very much like a fight or flight response. That's your sympathetic nervous system. But then if I was like, nah, I'm just joking, then everything kind of calms back down, like, and the heart rate sort of returns back to normal through that parasympathetic nervous system. So they kind of work in opposite directions. And so when we're talking about like fight or flight responses, like creating hormones and things like that, stress hormones, the sympathetic nervous system sort of triggers certain parts of the body. It goes on high alert, right? And it recruits things, other control systems like your endocrine system to sort of amp things up even further. And this is where, when we talk about like how the nervous system and the endocrine system are sort of linked together, your endocrine system is under the control of your nervous system, but it's actually like they're little glands, like your endocrine system is a series of like glands running throughout your body. There's your thyroid, there's your adrenal glands, like there's glands all over your body. And so when your body needs to kind of create one of these hormones, it just sends a nervous system signal to kind of get that to happen. But here's the thing, this is one of the reasons why stress can actually change the chemistry of your brain. If you are consistently stressed out and you're producing like lots of stress hormones, well, hormones, because they're glands, they're kind of like little muscles. I mean, they're not muscles, they don't have contractile proteins the same way that muscles do, but those glands, they can get developed and they get better at creating like, stress the more you use them. And that's why stress is so freaking bad for us, like they're saying nowadays, like it's like stress is more deadly than freaking smoking was, I guess more than smoking is. We were having this conversation last night. I still can't believe people still smoke. Like, I'm like, all the information's out there. Like, people know better at this point. How is this still happening? Because my friend was talking about how his nephew started smoking. I was like, what? So anyway, so that is like we're finding that like stress is like really bad for us, it has really, really, really negative effects. And so, not getting enough sleep and things like that, your body gets better at making stress hormones. Talking about sleep, look at that. Your body gets better at making those stress hormones. And so then like, let's say it was creating, 3 ounces of stress juice, you know, when you first started, but then you've had this stressful job for a really long time and you continue getting stressed out all the time. And now it's creating 5 ounces of stress juice every time, you know, like that's going to have a more intense effect. And so, you know, we're finding this is part of the reason why it causes hypertension, because that's what adrenaline does and what's what cortisol does is it's running throughout your body. You know, your nervous system doesn't want to have to continue creating like a big signal constantly to have something happen, to have something occur. So if it can create like a hormone that starts to kind of automatically have that thing happen, that's very much where your sympathetic nervous system comes in. You know, increasing your heart rate, for instance, is under the control of your nervous system. Like I can't consciously just straight up choose to raise my heart rate. I can't tell my heart how fast to beat. It is very much autonomic, but I can start thinking about things that make me very nervous. Like if I was talking about like if there was like a bee on my monitor right now, I would be in the other room and you guys would be on your own because I am really afraid of bees. And that's going to increase my heart rate a little bit. Now, if that freaking thing didn't go away and it just keeps like hanging out here and I'm trying to kind of soldier through and still do my job, I'm just going to get progressively more and more and more stressed out because my nervous system is going to create more, you know, interact with my endocrine system to create more of those stress hormones. And those stress hormones are slow to respond, but very intense. Like your nervous system's really quick, right? Like it's like, boom, electric signal, bam, move that bicep, right? There's not a lot of lag time there. But it's also something that like, you know, it does it and then it's done. Whereas like your endocrine system creates like a little bit of a something which has an effect on something else. And then it's kind of slow to respond. This is why it's sometimes hard for us to calm down after we get scared, you know, or you get that like kind of rush of that rush sensation afterwards. You know, you're watching a horror movie and it's like, ah, and you're like, oh God, ah, whoo, okay, I'm good. You know, like gotta have that cool down moment, right? That's very much because your endocrine system's a little bit slower than your nervous system. You're like, I know I'm not in danger anymore, but I'm still, you know, the heart's still racing, you know. So again, that is the, like I said, sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. They pretty much will have opposite effects on whatever tissues it is that they are interacting with. And so sympathetic freaks things out, parasympathetic calms things down. So that's the divisions of our nervous system. Any questions so far? How you three feeling?
So far, so good.
Love that.
Doing good.
Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. Let's zoom in a little bit. Now that we talked about like the outer structure, we're gonna zoom in before we'll zoom back out at the end. But let's zoom in and take a look at neurons themselves. Let's take a look at some of the microanatomy here. And so the neuron, right? That's the functional unit of the nervous system. Whenever you hear the term like functional unit of something, it's like, you know, your osteons, the hard, you know, these really hard calcium filled cells, right? That's the functional unit of your skeletal system. And because of osteons being stacked the way they are, we are able to have bones, you know. The muscle fiber has sarcomeres in it, and the sarcomere is the functional unit of the muscular system, because it's like without sarcomeres your muscles can't do the thing that they are most famous for, which is contracting. Well, in your nervous system, the neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. It's responsible for, you know, coordinating signals, generating electric signals, and zapping, you know, different materials running throughout the body. And so these are cells that coordinate and make up your actual nervous system. And you've got billions upon freaking billions of neurons running throughout your body, tons of them in your brain, but also running, you know, pretty much everywhere. And so they have a very highly specialized structure, you know, function following form, in order to be able to coordinate these, the body through these electrochemical signals that we talk about, right? So you'll always notice whenever we look at like a nerve cell GIF, you know, whenever we see like a neuron firing, you know, it kind of looks like a lightning bolt that's kind of running from spot to spot. It sort of looks like a you know, an electric signal. And that's because that's really what it is. It's an electrochemical signal. Oh, that's kind of cool. They were zooming in there. We'll take a better picture of that. But if you look, you can see there's some positive stuff out here and some negative stuff on the inside. And that's how we kind of flip that around. And that's how the electricity travels from point A to point B. Getting ahead of myself though. So looking at the actual neuron, it is a normal nerve cell. You can see like we always get really like lazy when we're drawing like specialized cells. It's like when it comes to like drawing like muscle fibers, you know, we get kind of lazy about it, where it's like we draw the thing that's important, you know, like we draw the thing that's like the main sort of part of the show. This picture is actually not so bad, but like you can see here, it's like we drew a bunch of sarcomeres, you know, like, and then, you know, you can see some, you know, little cow spots there. Those are going to be nuclei, you know, little nucleuses. So we always draw like the nucleus of our cells, but then like, you don't see any mitochondria in that picture. You don't see any lysosomes or Golgi apparatuses or anything like that. But they are there. And the same thing is true of our nerve cells. You know, it's going to have all the normal organelles. Remember, we don't have any cells that actually can look like this in you know, in our body. But this is a good picture that kind of represents all of the pieces of stuff that we do have. You know, this is sort of like, this is just a non-functioning, you know, human cell, right? Well, a nerve cell would look just like this, except it's going to have a couple special structures, and you know, it'll have its nucleus and stuff in there as well. So if we look at a nerve cell, actually, that's not bad. There we go. There's kind of a more detailed. Whoa, that is super zoomed in. Yeah, there we go. Okay, look, yeah, they did draw some of the stuff this time. That's kind of cool. So you can see, right, here's a pretty darn detailed picture. I love this. And this is what our nerve cells look like. They, you know, there's the kind of classic animal cell, but then it has these like big long tendrils that are kind of reaching out, right? These big long sort of like this big long tail right here, and then little fingers that are branching out from that tail, and then, you know, these little fingers that are branching out from here. And so that arrangement, you know, that's the cell's body, right? The cell's body is where you're going to find all your classic organelles, right? You're going to find your nucleus, you're going to find things like that. So this section here would be what we refer to as the cell body. And then special structures there, you are going to see little dendrites, which are fibers that carry nerve impulses to the cell body. And so when we look at all these little fingers branching out here, that's what we refer to as a dendrite. Dendrite, by the way, means tree, I think, in Greek. Maybe it's Latin, but I think it's in Greek. But and so like they kind of look like the little branches of a tree, you know. It's like a dead tree. It's the middle of fall, but like still, you know, like little fingers that are kind of branching out from there. And so that makes nerve cells really good at combining to other things. I mean, if you take a look here, you can see all these little fingers are reaching out and interacting with whatever type of tissues over here. Maybe it's another nerve cell, or maybe it's some other material, but like this finger would be really good at connecting to the little tail end fingers on the other end. And then we need to be able to like cover lots of distance with this. And that's why we have this big long tail right here that eventually branches down into all those individual fingers on the other end. And that is going to be what we refer to as the axon. Okay, so the axon is this big long section right here. So dendrites are fibers that are going to act as sort of like a switching center. They are the arms that are attaching, you know, synapses where one nerve cell is interacting with something else, and other structures of the body to the neuron itself. And so dendrites have little fingers that are kind of grabbing different parts of the body. And then the axons are fibers that are carrying nerve impulses away from the cell body. So like, you know, if we're trying to get like a signal, let's say like a nerve signal comes in from up here, one nerve to another, right? And so it's going to travel down, and then like, you know, it's going to get a signal that's going to interact here, and then that signal is going to travel to the center, and then that'll work its way down the axon of that neuron to wherever it happens to be going. Maybe it's another neuron, maybe it's a muscle, you know. Or maybe it's going to the brain, you know. And so that's what the axon is. The axon is the tail end where the signal is traveling away from the cell body. And one thing that we're not seeing in this picture right here is if you look at the axon of a neuron, you will see it is insulated with this special material right here. You can see these like kind of bead looking things that are kind of covering it. That is what is referred to as our myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath is this kind of fatty material that kind of wraps around our neurons, wraps around the axon of our neurons. And that actually protects of those electrochemical signals to make sure they don't end up like leaking out in whatever direction. Because electricity just wants to go wherever, you know, it just wants to find the shortest path to the ground, you know, like that's all electricity wants to do. So if you were to generate a lot of electricity and you have a lot of water in your body, which you freaking do, it would just kind of naturally want to like move in whatever direction it has to go. And so then that signal, that electricity might not travel down the neuron, it might just kind of travel somewhere else. And that would be chaos. Our body wouldn't be able to actually control things. So myelin is this fatty material made up of a lot of fat there. And that's a really good thing because that's insulating the signal, keeping it from sort of jumping out and leaking wherever it needs to go. Now you'll notice that there is actually a little bit of a gap between these pieces of myelin. You'll see there's a little bit of a gap there. That's also on purpose. That actually is where, you know, like I said, the electric signal will travel and it will jump to wherever it needs to jump to until it's, you know, getting grounded, right? And so thanks to having a little gap here, what that actually allows is the electric signal kind of jump from section to section, which speeds up the signal and makes it travel even faster. You know, it's kind of, honestly, it is kind of like bounding. It's like jumping from spot to spot. And then we call that that little gap right there the nodes of Ron-VA, which is a really fancy freaking name. And that is where the process of, we call it saltatory conduction, has nothing to do with salt, even though, yes, we use sodium to create these electric signals. But the reason it's called saltatory conduction is, I think, also in Latin, salt means to jump. So saltatory is a jumping action where the electric signal is jumping from myelin to myelin to myelin, and that speeds the signal up. It makes the signal travel way, way, way faster. So the myelin sheath is this special type of, I guess it's its own cell, that insulates and protects the axons of your nervous system so that your signals don't get lost. So this is what that kind of looks like. Again, you can see all the little dendrites here are going to gather information to the center, and then that's going to travel down the axon until eventually it interacts with, you know, maybe another neuron, or over here you can see it's interacting with you know, a muscle, and then that's going to zap, you know, this is a motor unit, right? Look at all these little fingers here. That's going to, let's say this is a muscle cell, and that's a muscle cell, and that's a muscle cell, and that one, and that one, that one, right? Like, so now we see all these like muscle cells, and they're all being zapped by this one neuron. That is what we refer to as a motor unit, just hugely important for us, right? Because when we're exercising, we are recruiting lots and lots and lots of motor units. And you're going to choose how many motor units you're you know, recruiting based on what intensity you're lifting at, how many reps you're doing, the speed of your contraction, things like that. So it does seem, you know, like I said, that we're getting nitty gritty about some of this anatomy sometimes, but it really does have direct implications for how we chose exercises. You know, Bay Lorianne, I think I said it in your class. I think it was when you guys were at Sochi in person. But I always tell you, like, you know, it's good to memorize the OPT model. It's good to memorize, you know, the sets and the reps and have those numbers just kind of logged up here. But at the same time, like, memorization is, you know, easy to be flawed. You know, it's easy to kind of just say that you're like, oh, well, it's supposed to be 12 to 20. But like, you just have that number memorized. And it's like, but like knowing the why behind it gives you a much deeper understanding of everything. Why do we choose 12 to 20 reps, or why do we do 1 to 5 reps for other types of lifts? The why behind things gives you a much richer understanding of everything. And so, you know, I think that like understanding some of this microanatomy, sometimes it makes it easy. We're like, oh, so the reason we use 1 to 5 reps is because like that recruits more motor units, and so that gives us a bigger nervous system signal, and that bigger nervous system signal needs to happen because neurons are recruiting as many muscle fibers as possible. So there's some direct correlations and some direct conclusions that we can kind of draw here. So that myelin sheath, like I said, special type of cell. You'll sometimes see diseases associated with the myelin sheath. For instance, if you've, I just saw it yesterday. There's some actress just announced that she has multiple sclerosis. So MS or multiple, Christina Applegate, that's right. Yeah, Christina Applegate just came out and said that she was diagnosed with MS. So MS, multiple sclerosis, is a disease of the nervous system. It's it's not a disease of the nervous system. It's an autoimmune disease. And it is where, for some reason, the nervous system or the immune system decides one day that it is going to start eating away that myelin. And so the myelin sheath gets damaged because of our own sort of immune system. We don't really know why. We don't really know how to cure it. But what starts to happen is you can see the myelin, rather than, protecting that signal, well, now those electrochemical signals can, they can kind of move in directions they're really not supposed to move. The electricity gets lost. So maybe somebody who has MS, you'll notice they have very poor balance because like they are supposed to send a signal recruiting this muscle and that muscle. And then all of a sudden that signal gets lost, and there's a miscommunication. And so they'll lose their balance. Now, we cannot cure MS, but we as personal trainers have really positive effects on people who have MS by helping them, improve their balance, doing, single leg lift and chops and things like that. That improved balance doesn't necessarily mean that we are, thickening the myelin, although that is something that does come along with working on stabilization exercises. But we're not necessarily just like, fixing this autoimmune function, but we are improving quality of life. Lorianne, not to put you on the spot, but I know that like, you have some problems with like balance and stuff due to like your nervous system. That's not something that we can cure through exercise, but it is something that we can have a positive effect on. I may not be able to get MS to go away, but I can make you better at balancing and catching yourself and knowing how to go through like a certain range of motion. And that can have a very, very, very positive effect on everyone, and that's why we love the stabilization phase of the OPT model. We love balance exercises. We love reactive exercises. They give me the kind of exciting, right? It's motivating. Love that. Let me get back over here. Okay, so I've actually worked with a lot of clients who have MS. It's more common than you think. So there's what our myelin kind of looks like, right? You can see there's by the way, this piece of myelin, this fatty material surrounding it, that does have a name. We call those Schwann cells. This is like that's like Sean Connery talking about swans. But those are Schwann cells, and they just kind of wrap around. And you can thicken that. You can thicken that the more, the more you send signals, the more your nervous system uses certain things, the more it will sort of myelinate things. And this is how your coordination gets better and better and better. Like the more you do something, right? Like let's say I only have one lacrosse ball here, but let's just say I start like learning how to juggle, right? And I'm like, 1, 2, 3, and I drop them, and I pick them up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I drop them, and I pick them up again. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I drop them. I'm getting a little bit better every single time. The reason I'm getting better at that is because I'm getting thicker and thicker myelin around the neurons that are being used to coordinate those signals. There's a really great YouTube channel. If you guys want to burn some freaking time and just like, just kind of zonk out and, lay in bed and watch a fun little YouTube video here, check out, oh gosh, what's his name? Mike Boyd. Mike Boyd has this really fun channel here where he basically learns how to be an expert on something. He started his channel where he's like, they say it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert on something. I wanted to see if that's true. And so his whole channel is based around like, how he can learn how to become an expert on something in a really short period of time. So I'm going to pull up a really brief version of this really quick.
3, 2, 1. Your muscles are
Hush.
In some wireless.
So he's like, there's this really cool kind of baseball bat trick that this guy does, where you can see, watch this. He's kind of warming up, and then he does this like kind of fun spin thing. You see that? That's crazy, right? It's wild. So Mike wanted to learn. He's like, how fast can I learn how to do this? And so what he does is he puts like a little ticker down here, and he's like, this is day 1, hour 1, and you can see like, obviously he's not very good at it, but towards the end of the video, like, he learns how to kind of practice this, and he's tracking how long he can do it. And he does it while I think that's meant to be like, I don't know, maybe those are just sunglasses, but blindfolded or something. But and there you go. He learns how to do the spin. It's not perfect. He still drops it every now and then, but he's getting better and better and better and better and better at it. So it's a really fun channel. A lot of really cool things that he's basically like kind of challenging himself to learn how to do. He's like, how many skills can I learn on this YouTube channel? My favorite one, by the way, if you want to watch a really cool episode of that, is he learns how to take a bottle of champagne and take like a wine glass and knock the top, like break the glass top off of the champagne bottle, which is like a really cool party trick to like be able to do. And I plan on totally impressing somebody someday once I learn how to do that. So anyway, the way you get better is like you're developing thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker myelin, and your nerve cells get better and better and better and better and better at doing stuff. Now, on the flip side of that, here's the bummer. Here's the not so great part of our, myelin and our nervous system and things like that. With getting better and better and better at stuff, the reason that's happening is because you are myelinating, you're thickening that myelin because an electric signal is traveling, right? It's literally electricity. What the heck happens to electricity when, when it runs through something, guys? Well, when electricity runs through something, it does this. It freaking chars. Oh God, that's not. Oh God, these are not. That's way more intense than I wanted to look up. I meant in like wood. Electric burn wood. Good Lord, that's not what I meant to look up. But you can see here, like, this is actually kind of a cool like woodworking thing. I think it's called like a Lichtenberg effect, but this is where you soak a little bit of water in wood and then you run electricity through it. It makes these really cool, you can see where like the really intense parts of electricity, and then it kind of branches smaller, and then the signal gets smaller and smaller. But here's the thing. All like even these big branches here, they started kind of small. If you watch this happen, wood burning. Let's see if I can just find a GIF so I don't have to pull up a full video of this. I know this seems weird, like we're looking up woodworking right now, but trust me, it's relevant to what we're talking about. All right, there. This is what happens when electricity runs through stuff, right? Notice how like it starts kind of small and then like it kind of branches out, gets thicker and thicker and thicker. So here's the thing. That is happening, your nervous system is using this freaking electricity, right? It's using these electro signals. So maybe it's the first time you have ever tried soda. You're a little kid, first time you ever like that freaking soda, which is absolutely packed full of sugar. So what happens? Well, your nervous system signals, your taste buds send a signal to the brain, and that signal is like, whoa, there is some freaking sugar in this stuff, like, and your brain goes, really? Wow, yeah, that is a really good, Coca-Cola is a really good source of sugar, and then your brain goes, gosh, well, I love sugar, like sugar is how we produce a lot of energy. And so your brain goes, we should absolutely drink some more of that soda. And then you do it again. And it's like your nervous system's like, yeah, holy crap, this works really well, and it starts reinforcing that signal. And this is how addictions kind of develop. Understanding this parts of our nervous system. We're going to be going into looking at habits later this mod. And when it comes to creating new habits, understanding how our nervous system functions is a really big part of that, because you are thickening that myelin. You're sending a deeper electric signal. And now, if you were to run electricity through something again, it's going to take the same route. And this is why sometimes it's so hard for us to break our habits, like I was a total sugar addict when I was a kid. My parents didn't have any rules about soda. They had no rules about like how I was allowed to drink soda. I had Coca-Cola when I was a little kid. In fact, I have a horror story from when I was a little kid. One time my parents and I were staying, I think we were in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. But we were, I can't, don't quote me on that. But we were staying in a hotel room, and my parents would always do the same thing. They would put buckets of ice in the sink, and then they would put like Cokes in there to like keep them cold all night. And I like woke up in the middle of the night, and I'm like tugging on my mom's shirt, and I was like, Mom, I'm thirsty. And she's like, there's Coke at the end of the bed. Middle of the night, my parents are like, go have a Coke, little child. They had no idea how bad soda was. But I literally like, I go to the end of it and I like open it. This is so bad. And I'm like, Mom, this pop is spicy. And my mom's like, what? I was like, it's really spicy. And she's like, oh my God. So finally I've annoyed her enough. And she like turns the light on, and I was covered head to toe in fire ants. And they started biting the crap out of me. Like me in my little like pajamas and stuff. And my mom's like, ah, she starts screaming, and my dad's like, what? And he like grabs me and throws me in the shower and just like turns the water on and scrubs me down. I got all these bite marks all over my body and stuff. So that was horrifying. But anyway, all that to say, I was a total sugar addict when I was a kid. And like that habit is still there. Those neurons are still in my body. They are still, the same parts of my brain light up whenever I have Coca-Cola, because I freaking love it. I am a Coca-Cola addict to this day, in being a health and fitness professional, being a health expert, 100% still a Coke addict, Coca-Cola. And so, that is something that I only partake in when I go to the movies. That's kind of the rule for me. For me, like going to the movies is a special event. It's not something I do all the time. And so it's something that I can have in like moderation, and that's where I do it. But, if I had my way, I would drink that stuff every day. And it would be terrible for me, and I'd get diabetes, like, but that is because of nervous system signals. That's how that kind of functions. I'm talking about this all right now. This is going to be much more important when we get to our psychology class coming up in a couple days. But I'm kind of laying the groundwork right now. So we'll go ahead and move on from this topic, but let's go ahead and talk about the different types of neurons that we got.
I have a question.
Yeah,
I have
please.
a question. So back to the myelin. So basically to strengthen the signal, basically the stabilization exercises would be ideal for clients to build that thickness of the myelin shield.
Yep, absolutely. Because think about it.
Okay.
Think about like what a stabilization exercise is. What's our tempo in stabilization, Bay?
The 4, 3, 2, 1 is, or am I
You're really close. 4-2-1.
Four
There's
to one.
you're not just counting down. But yeah, it's a 4-2-1 tempo, right? And how many reps? It is a pop
Is
quiz.
it the 10 to
Ooh, a little
12?
higher, a little
12
higher.
to 15 to 15?
12 to 20.
I
12 to 20. Balance exercises are 6 to 10
Oh.
because it's single-sided, so then it corresponds like 12 to 20, but 12 to 20. So now, slow tempo, 12 to 20 reps, right? That's a lot of time under tension. So when you think about like doing stabilization, right? It's a lot of time under tension. If I'm standing here on one leg and I'm doing bicep curls, right? I'm like 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Look at how long I'm standing on one leg, right? So that length of time is just nervous system signals, one after the next, after the next, after the next, electricity running through, the like all this time. And that's why sometimes like after your workouts, you can feel tired, exhausted, like physically, because your muscles are just kind of, you're like, whew, man, I'm tired, but you also sometimes feel a little like worn out up here, sometimes it feels like your brain's a little worn out, like anybody ask me to make a decision after I'm done working out, I'm like, I don't know, like, my decision making is a little bit slower because my nervous system's worn out. Okay, one more personal story. This is just kind of very funny to highlight what I'm talking about here. This is true. I got done working out at 24-hour fitness one time. I was doing a really heavy night. I was lifting really, really heavy. That's another way to activate massive parts of your nervous system. And I was just so worn out. I was totally exhausted. And I'm walking back to my car so I can go home, shower, and go meet this girl that I had just started dating. And so I like walk out of 24-hour fitness and I'm walking to my car. And these two girls are rollerblading coming up to me. And she's like, oh my gosh, look at this. Hey, how are you? And I was like, hi, you. My brain was so worn out, and it was so in the context of like gym time. And it was the girl that I was literally going to see later that night. It was this girl I just started dating. And I was so embarrassed. And like, she was with her friend, and I remember like when it all came rushing back and my brain finally clicked, it was like, yeah, she said she was going rollerblading tonight before we got together. And like, she was hanging out with her friend, Catherine. And sure enough, she was like, do you like Catherine? Later that night. And I was like, yeah, Kate's fine. Yeah, she's totally fine. Why? And she was like, oh, she was just getting the feeling that you didn't like her. And I was like, really? Why is that? And she's like, I don't know, you were acting kind of weird tonight. And I was like, yeah, that's because I didn't recognize who you were. I was freaked out. My brain literally was just completely zonked. And that is something that is true about exercise. It uses up your nervous system. And so your whole brain's a little bit slower until you get some freaking glucose to kind of wake things up afterwards. That was a really embarrassing thing. But yeah, Bay, 100% stabilization. It's a great way to strengthen that myelin. Really great way to kind of train the nervous system there. And that's why it's one of our primary goals of stabilization. When we look at like primary goals of the stabilization phase, it's all about like developing the nervous system, teaching your body how to do these particular movements. Strength is all about like learning how to recruit, more motor units to do those things and make you stronger. And then power is learning how to recruit those motor units faster. And that's, the differences between stabilization, strength, and power. Great question. Love questions. I'm all fired up. That was awesome. All right. So let's take a look at the different types of neurons that we got. So we got all kinds of neurons doing all kinds of things, right? So you have got sort of three primary categories of neurons. You have got what are called sensory neurons. You've got what are called motor neurons, and then you've got interneurons taking place in between. Now, here's the thing. I want to apologize on behalf of the world of biology right now for the way that these two things are labeled. This is going to be very annoying. But sensory neurons are called afferent neurons, and motor neurons are called efferent neurons. And keeping that straight is like keeping affect and effect straight, which is, to me, those, I said them differently, but they sound exactly the freaking same. So I will try to over enunciate afferent and efferent as best I can. But afferent impulses, afferent neurons are neurons that are sensory neurons. They are heading towards the brain. So if I pick up this ball, which is nice and smooth and, cool and, just below room temperature, I can grab this thing, and the sensory information going into my brain is like, yeah, that's a totally safe thing to grab. Go for it. Keep your hand there. But if this were, I don't know, let's say really spiky and, it was sitting next to I've got a heater. If I had a heater on my desk and I was sitting next to that and it was really hot and spiky and thorny, and all of a sudden I grab it and it punctures my skin, well, then the sensory information going to my brain is going to be like, hey, we just got damaged, right? So it is going from an effector site to the brain, right? So it's going from wherever to the brain, okay? In this case, it was my palm going up to it. That's what sensory neurons are responsible for. Think of it this way, they gather information, okay? Now, in response, if it's nice and cool, my brain will go, well, you know what? Go ahead and keep holding on. That's fine, right? And so then motor units in my brain will travel back to the muscles that control my hand, and they'll keep holding on to it, right? But if it's spiky, it's thorny, it's hot, it's dangerous, well, then the information going back from my brain to my muscles is going to say, drop it, open up the hand. And those are going to be my motor neurons. So motor neurons are neurons that conduct impulses to muscles or glands away from the brain. So this goes from an effector site to the brain. This goes from the brain to an effector site. So they are opposite of each other. Afferent neurons are sensory neurons. Efferent neurons or efferent neurons are motor neurons. They're responsible for sending the information away in order to recruit, muscles mostly, but, all of our other stuff as well. Your heart, whatever. Again, these could either be autonomic or they could be somatic. Somatic neurons will control the voluntary stuff, and autonomic ones will control the involuntary stuff. And then obviously we don't just have like one wire running from our brain down to our biceps or running from our brain down to our, right pinky toe. We have to have like a neuron to a neuron to a neuron, because cells are small. So we've got what are called interneurons, and that's where it's going from neuron to neuron to neuron, from place to place. So they're responsible for, making sure that that signal keeps traveling to wherever it's going. So those are the main types of neurons. Now, there is specialized neurons as well. For instance, there's what are called neuroglia, which are protective neurons within our nervous system. Those Schwann cells we talked about earlier, right? This myelin, that's an example of neuroglia. You'll also sometimes see what are called astrocytes. We used to think astrocytes, honestly, we used to think that they like I was taught this. We were learning more about this every day. But we used to think that they were just kind of there to act as like buffers and stuff. But they actually have a lot more functions than we give them credit for, especially when it comes to the autonomic parts of our nervous system. These astrocytes kind of cover all of our tissues, and they do make it easier for us to coordinate signals. And that's how we start to develop more efficient routes, and that's also a part of how we get better at things. Sometimes just changing up the way you do things a little bit recruits different neurons ever so slightly, and so it takes a slightly different path or a different route, and then that signal can travel faster. It's like when you're going to work for the first time, you map it on Google Maps or whatever, and you're like, where am I going to go? And I'm taking this and I'm taking this. And you take that, and then one day on the way to work, you're like, I'm going to take that alley. That seems like that might be a little bit faster. I can skip all this traffic. And so you start to learn this like faster, more efficient route. that's kind of how like neuroglia works actually. Those astrocytes can sometimes be a much more efficient way for an electric signal to travel, because we are trying to get it there as fast as possible. And that's also part of like why stabilization makes us better at stuff, is because we're getting, you know, better and better and better at it. So we're going to talk more about this tomorrow, because it's going to be much more relevant for tomorrow. But if those are the three types of neurons, well, it mirrors very similarly the three functions of our nervous system. Your nervous system is going to have three primary functions. Like I said, there's going to be in your notes tomorrow, so don't worry about it for now. It is going to have sensory function. It's in charge of gathering information. It's going to have motor function, which is responsible for like, you know, responding to sensory information. And then you're going to have the integrative part of your nervous system. You have integrative function, which is, you know, your brain interpreting things, you know, like for instance, if, you know, the first time you ever placed your hand on a stove and it was nice and cool, you might think that that's like a safe place to leave your hand. And then later on, like it's on, and all of a sudden you touch it and it's freaking hot and you burn yourself. Well, that's both examples of like sensory information, right? Sensory information comes in, your brain goes, that's really dangerous, we should move, right? And so then it recruits muscles to pull away. That's motor information. So sensory information comes in, integrative integrative function makes a decision, and motor information goes out in response. How do we know which motor information to make? That's the integrative part. And our brain gets better and better and better at that all the time. So like I said, we'll talk more about that tomorrow. That'll be really relevant to sort of how we're capping the entire kinetic chain together tomorrow. But let's go ahead and move on into reflexes. So like I said, you know, your entire nervous system does use electrochemical signals to coordinate all of this, right? If we take a look here, you do have like what is called a nerve impulse, and that's the electric signal that we talk about. That nerve impulse is happening because your nerves are generating what we call an action potential. An action potential is negative 40 millivolts of electricity that basically triggers this signal to actually start traveling. Once it reaches, if we look at action potential here, is it negative 40? It might be negative 70 actually. Nope, 40. So you can actually see, oh, that's right, we're sitting at negative 70. So we sit at negative 70, and then we actually depolarize, and basically we make, if you look at your neurons, you can actually see there's fluid outside the cell and fluid inside the cell. And so in the cell, there's all these potassium ions, and outside the cell, there's all of these sodium ions. So inside the cell is negative and outside the cell is positive. And what will happen is your cells will use these special pumps. You can see these little blue pumps right here, which are sodium pumps. And then there's these little red pumps over here, which are potassium pumps. And these sodium potassium pumps are going to push sodium from one side to the other. So now sodium is going to rush into the cell and potassium is going to rush out of the cell. And that's going to be where we are depolarizing the cells, right? And when it hits negative 40 millivolts worth, when there's enough sodium inside and enough potassium outside, that generates enough electricity to travel down the neuron. And we're actually seeing that here, right? We're seeing like it's positive, it's negative, and then all of a sudden over here it flips. Now it's negative and it's positive, right? But it hasn't happened in this portion of the cell's axon just yet. It hasn't like, or the dendrites or wherever. It hasn't traveled to this part of the cell just yet. And so then this is still positive outside, still negative inside. But it will travel down the axon of the neuron, and it will jump from, you know, myelin to myelin to myelin. And so like that's why when we're looking at our nervous system signals, This is only one of them, kind of drawn this way. But imagine if, it was one and then another and another and another and another, and then it sends a signal like, right? Zap, 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 zap. That is how fast your nervous system is sort of firing. So this is also one of the ways that we control our contractions. Remember yesterday I said one of the ways we control muscle contractions is by recruiting less motor units. That less motor units means less muscle fibers, which means less force production. Well, one of the other ways that we control how fast or how strong a contraction is by how quickly we send those signals, those electric signals. If you send one after the other like this, that's going to be a really strong, super powerful contraction. But if you send the signals kind of slow like this, like zap, 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 that might be a weaker contraction. So that's another way that our nervous system is designed to help us control how strong our reactions are to something. Now, and so it looks something kind of like this. When you're resting, there's no electricity being generated, but then a stimulus occurs. Let's say you decide to contract your muscle, right? So you have a conscious thought. And so sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out. And then that causes and then eventually those concentrations actually drop a little bit below where they were before, and then your body does what's called repolarization to get you back to neutral, and the concentrations are restored. This is why it's important to drink not to drink, but to have electrolytes in your diet. We need sodium and we need potassium. When you have someone who's cramping up, it's because their nervous system's not coordinating these signals the way they're supposed to. So what do? Have them eat a banana, that'll give them a little bit of sugar, which is going to help with, producing energy, which, this sodium potassium stuff, this takes energy to pump these things on either side. So if you don't have enough ATP, you're not gonna be able to do it and you're gonna cramp up, right? But we also need to have sufficient sodium and sufficient potassium to move these things around. They're like little batteries, and those little batteries need to be able to move effectively. And so we need to have enough, ingredients to fuel those batteries. We need sodium in our diet. We need potassium in our diet. Theoretically, if someone's cramping up, you could also say they need more sodium, but how many people do you know are not getting enough sodium? It's always potassium. That's why it's always eat a banana. Technically, if you really want to be great, it's be like eat a salty banana, but well, I love salt. So here's what that kind of looks like, right? Here's where that action potential, that electric signal is actually traveling. You can see it's positive and negative, and then this is flipping. And it's traveling, from here down the axon of the neuron until eventually it gets to whatever signal. And this will happen in a muscle cell as well. An action potential will run across our muscle cells in order to recruit those as well. And here's where that's, here's a picture of it where that's happening with like the myelin here, right? So, that signal can jump this little tiny gap right there. And that, it may not be a huge gap, but that little jumping action really does speed things up. And we want things to travel, as fast as possible. So taking a look at how your nerves are actually sort of interacting with all this material, right? These other things. We have to talk a little bit about what's called a synapse. So a synapse is the junction point where a neuron is interacting with something else, another neuron, a muscle cell, a gland, whatever, right? It is where a neuron is connected to something else. We call that a synapse, okay? It's synapsing with whatever. And so you have different neurotransmitters that are going to interact with that other material, because we can't just run straight electricity from a neuron onto another cell. We need that cell to kind of generate its own action potential. So like I said, your muscles generate your muscles are going to generate their own action potential. How do they know when to do that? Well, that's where the nervous system is sort of interacting there. So you can actually see right here in this little GIF, there's the action potential traveling down. And what that's going to do is that's going to trigger the release of these little chemicals, which are in these little bubbles here. Well, actually, the animation stopped. Give me the full thing, please. That will cause these little neurotransmitters, which were in this little sac here, to move across and bind, and then that will generate an action potential in the muscle itself. Okay, so this is a neurotransmitter. Yeah, this is an electric signal traveling down that releases the neurotransmitters into the little gap here, that then they bind to these little receptors right there, and then an electric signal runs across the muscle cell, and the muscle cell contracts. So it is using chemicals to make this happen, right? Norepinephrine, which is a fancy way of saying adrenaline. Serotonin, that's one that makes you feel really great. Dopamine, that's one that makes you feel really, really great. Dopamine is why, that's your brain, saying, oh, I love that. Let's do more of that, right? Acetylcholine, that's a big one. That's the one that allows the contractions in our muscles to occur. That's ACH, right? That's what we're seeing right here. So it's going to go from neuron, and then this is interacting with another neuron, right? This is a synapse right here. And so, how does that signal, how does that electricity pass from this neuron to that neuron? Well, this neuron will start generating electricity in response to that neurotransmitter, that acetylcholine. Same thing is true in our muscle cells. Any questions on any of that so far, guys? Feeling good?
So no questions.
Cool.
Okay.
Love it. All right, let's take a look at reflexes, because reflexes are so cool. So we have what is known as the reflex arc. So here's the thing. I said earlier that we gather information with our sensory nervous system. It travels up to the brain, and then the brain goes, well, this is what you should do. And then sends a signal back to recruit motor neurons, right? So from peripheral nervous system to central system, back to peripheral system, right? Well, that is true. That is how things work in general. But what if something's really dangerous? What if something's really intense, right? Well, if there is a big enough stimulus coming in, your spine will actually make a decision instead of your brain. And that is what we call a reflex. So for instance, if you've ever been to the doctor and they smack you on the kneecap, right? They have that little hammer and they hit you with that kneecap, hit you with the hammer on the kneecap, right? What happens? Your leg kicks forward, right? Well, the reason your leg's kicking forward like that, that is a response. That is what is called a stretch reflex. And what the doctor did is they smacked the Golgi tendon organs living in your patellar tendon. And that sent such a large signal throughout your muscle that your quadricep is fooled into thinking that it's being overstretched, and it's being stretched at the speed of light. And so all of a sudden your quadricep thinks, it's like, whoa, I'm being stretched, I'm being pulled apart, I'm gonna tear. So what it does in response to protect itself is, instead of allowing itself to be stretched out, it contracts back in the other direction. So it pulls. And when your quadricep pulls, your leg kicks forward. And that is a reflex arc. These are very simple. Obviously, we fooled the kneecap there, right, into thinking that, it was being overstretched when it wasn't. We call that a simple reflex, right? This is often what a reflex is. It's very, very simple because it's rapid, it's automatic, and your spine made that decision rather than your brain, which your brain's a big nerd, like it's like, I don't know, I gotta weigh all my options. What is it we should do? If you're tearing a muscle or you're cutting your skin open or something and you jerk your hand back, that is your very simple parts of your nervous system going, ouch, God, like you touch something really sharp, you touch something really hot, right? That's a reflex reaction. That's why, kind of jerk your hand back in response to things sometimes. So we can actually see that happening right here, right? this person's touching this little like sharp pin. That signal travels up, it gets to the spine, and then it's going to continue that signal up to the brain. But for now, your spine goes, yeah, no, that's a big stimulus. That's real dangerous, right? And then it sends a very simple signal back over to the bicep muscle to contract and retract your arm. This is often why if you've ever had, a roommate, if it was me, or, anybody jump out from behind the corner like, blah, and they scare the crap out of you and you're like, good, like, you have that moment where you're like, ah, right? Speaking of scaring, it freaked out the dog. That is usually very rapid. It's very uncontrolled. It's automatic. You don't really have like a lot of like control over it, so that's very much your reflexes, right? They're very simple. The withdrawal reflex is an example of what we see there. We also see this in our muscles. If you rapidly stretch a muscle, that muscle will try to protect itself, and your peripheral nervous system will actually tell it to contract. You will have a spinal reflex. We can take advantage of that. We can actually use that to our advantage to be a little bit more explosive and a little bit more powerful. So if we think about like how we're going to use a stretch reflex, a simple reflex, right? We are basically going to stretch a muscle. This is what we refer to as a stretch reflex, right? So a stretch reflex is when a muscle is rapidly stretched, your nervous system, it kind of panics, right? And so it decides to contract that muscle in response to keep it from being overstretched. And what happens is then if you are consciously contracting that muscle, you're going to get a little bit more explosiveness. You're going to get a little bit more effort. You're going to get a really big jump out of that exercise. And this is why when you are jumping, you don't want to do this. You don't want to like go down, hold your jump, and then explode. You want to go down as fast as you can so that you can come up as fast as you can. If you throw your arms down and then jump and you don't take any pause in between, you're not giving your nervous system any time to calm down. You are sending this big signal like, whoa, we're being super stretched. And so then the muscle's like, all right, we'll contract. And so then we contract with it. We get this big jump and you're going to be much more explosive. This is also why baseball players, they do like, the swing and then they bring it up, that right there, rather than just holding a ball here and then just like, trying to throw it. You're going to have a lot more force by snapping your muscle back, which is overstretching it, so that you can snap it forward and you can then shorten it. So that's why that's called a stretch shortening cycle or a stretch reflex. The knee jerk reflex is a good example of that. All right, any questions on the on the nervous system before we move into the endocrine system? You can see the notes are getting a little sparse here.
Say all good.
All right, well, let's do it. So your endocrine system, what we are going to talk about, and we're going to wrap this, like I said, this is going to move really fast. We're going to talk about what hormones are, what their functions are, and their chemistry a little bit, their proteins and steroids, how that's regulated through negative feedback. And then we'll talk very briefly about specific endocrine organs. We probably won't spend too much time on endocrine tissues. And then we'll look very briefly at, aging, how that affects things, and stress, how that affects things. There are a lot of hormones out there, guys. They're, don't get me wrong, it's a very important part of our anatomy. It's just not one that we have a huge effect on. And so it's not something we spend a ton of time studying. You'll notice, like, if you go through your book, you look at that chapter, it's like your hormone section's way shorter than the rest of it. So your endocrine system is a series of glands that are producing hormones, and hormones are going to control various bodily systems in various ways. So it's working with your nervous system to control and coordinate other signals, other systems, right? So it's doing this through chemicals rather than through electrochemical signals. So this is affecting by changing the chemistry, right? So for instance, growth hormone. which is responsible for telling, human tissue to develop and grow and split and you divide and get bigger, right? Growth hormone is responsible for doing that. And that is a hormone that is created by your endocrine system. Testosterone, also a very anabolic hormone, right? Thyroid hormone, very anabolic. Insulin, which is a hormone that's in charge of signaling, hey, let's pull sugar out of the blood and drive it into the cells. That's also a hormone. It's a very different type of hormone. They have a very different chemical structure, but they are both hormones. So that is created by your endocrine system. So some of them are going to be protein based. There's going to be sort of an amino acid compound there. And then some of them are going to be very lipid based. So they're very much made out of like fatty acids. The protein based ones are very much things like your sex hormones. And then your lipid based ones are things like your steroid hormones, testosterone, estrogen, things like that. So your body is constantly trying to use negative feedback to get your body back to whatever it's supposed to be, or maybe it's using, positive feedback to kind of increase and intensify something. But, your body is going to sort of have a response to things. You are going to have sort of a sympathetic response to stress where your body is going to produce stress hormones. And so now all of a sudden, like all of your tissues are much more active, you're stressed out, but in maybe a good way, and you're really active, you can recruit muscles in a really positive way, you're really strong. You hear about those stories about like mothers where like their kids pinned under something super, super heavy and they go and they lift like a car, like it's like, how the heck did that happen? This incredible feat of strength. It's like, well, adrenaline's a pretty freaking amazing hormone, and so that adrenal, sort of response is very sympathetic, right? That's your nervous system controlling it, but it produces a lot of this. And the more adrenaline you produce, the more intensely your heart rate will work, the more intensely your muscles will activate. So that's an example of, kind of amping things up, but then your body's going to need to get back to normal. Your body's going to have to get back to rest and digest mode. And so your parasympathetic nervous system is going to create anti-stress hormones, things like dopamine, things like serotonin, stuff that's going to calm you down. And the parasympathetic nervous system is going to get you back into sort of resting and digesting mode. So you can see here, this is like your happening right up here at the base of your brain, where we have what is known as the pituitary gland. That is sometimes referred to as the master gland. And your pituitary gland is going to work with your hypothalamus to sort of interact where your nervous system and your endocrine system are sort of coming together. And so the pituitary gland will release hormones that will stimulate other hormones. And that's what's kind of interesting about hormones. This is why it can get so complicated, is because your nervous system is like a light switch, right? You turn the light switch on and the light bulb turns on or off or whatever, right? With hormones, it's almost like if I was downstairs and my roommate was at the top of the stairs and I had another roommate here and I was like, hey, turn the light on. And then he was like, hey, turn the light on. And then the third guy turns the light on, right? Like that's kind of how hormones work. They kind of, you stimulate this hormone to make that hormone, which stimulates that hormone. And this is why sometimes like your endocrine system is so slow to respond to things where you're like, good Lord, I'm just trying to get a signal out here. I'm just trying to respond to something, but it's like kind of a slow process. And so you stay a little freaked out for a little while. So glands, like the pituitary gland, are recruited by the nervous system to release hormones, and hormones are the actual chemical messengers that are having these effects. The biggest one that we talk about is the pituitary gland. This is the master gland. It is releasing hormones that control other hormones. So for instance, your pituitary gland creates TSH, that's thyroid stimulating hormone. And thyroid stimulating hormone triggers the glands in your thyroid, which lives here in your neck, to release thyroid hormone, which speeds up or slows down your metabolism. So that's one of them. There's a lot of them out there. There's adrenocorticotropic hormones. There's antidiuretic hormones. There's tons of them. Look at how many, growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, prolactin, follicle stimulating hormone. That's what, guys create a little bit more of that. Which is why like men tend to have a little bit more body hair than women do. That's because of follicle stimulating hormone. But then also men also make testosterone, which degrades into oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of it. Dihydrotestosterone, DHT, and that is what actually makes your hair fall out, which is why people will take like Rogaine, which will basically block DHT and stuff. There's luteinizing hormone, which makes proteins. Lots of different types of hormones there. Antidiuretic, oxytocin, that's probably the coolest one. You've probably heard of oxytocin before. That is referred to as the cuddle hormone. Oxytocin is the hormone that you will create when you are holding your loved ones, or when you experience like human affection. And that's part of like why, like, we bond to other people. It's sometimes our oxytocin production. So you can see these are where we're creating these, right? You've got your pituitary gland here at the base of the brain, and then there's your thyroid, right? And then there's, your adrenal glands, which are living on top of your kidneys, actually. And then, there's where we're creating our sex hormones, so those are different hormones that we've got out there. And there's just a ton of them. You can see like, here's kind of a list here. They all do different things. But the big ones that we kind of spend our time talking about are insulin, right? Insulin and glucagon. Insulin, which drives sugar out of your blood into your cells so you can produce energy or store that energy for later. Glucagon, which tells that stored energy to get broken down. You've got the different parts of your thyroid, right? Working there. There's thyroid, which is telling your cells to either speed up or telling your cells to kind of slow down. That's regulating your metabolism. If you have a slow thyroid, you might find that you have a really, big lack of energy. You might feel like you're just exhausted and drained all the time. And it's like, well, maybe you should take a look at your thyroid, and your doctor can put you on a medication that will sort of speed that thyroid up, and suddenly it'll feel like you have more energy. But sometimes there's like conditions where people will actually have way too much thyroid hormone. They'll actually be producing a little bit too much energy. You can have what is called Graves' disease. We'll see a picture of this later, but Graves' disease is really interesting. You'll see where people, they have this they're kind of like a little bug-eyed. And the reason that happens is because like the muscles that are contracting the eyes basically get really freaking turned on, so you might feel great for a little while when you start having Graves' disease. You're like, gosh, I have so much energy, I never need to sleep, and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and you look all bug-eyed, and it's like, yeah, you're creating way too much thyroid hormone. Your thyroid is a little overactive. So here's some other ones. I'm not going to go through every one of these. One of these that's kind of cool though, calcitonin, that regulates your calcium metabolism. So calcitonin is working with parathyroid hormones and vitamin D to calcify and make our bones more dense. So, sometimes we'll look at like people who have osteoporosis and we'll look at their calcitonin levels. So, like I said, you've got your adrenal glands living on top of your kidneys. They look like little hats for your kidneys, but that is where you are producing your adrenaline, which is also where sometimes, like, if you have like kidney damage, that can sometimes result in like adrenal problems, which is not great. But basically, when your body is creating adrenaline, it creates this material called epinephrine. That is the fight or flight hormone, right? Or norepinephrine, which is its precursor. And that is basically, what is going to sort of amp certain materials up. If you drop adrenaline onto like a muscle cell, or if you run it past your heart, the heart will speed up. It will actually start contracting faster. Your pancreas is what's responsible for creating your insulin and your glucagon. So that's a really important one. Insulin lowers your blood sugar levels. Glucagon increases your blood sugar levels. And you can see like there's where that's happening, right? There's the little pancreas right there. it's got alpha and beta cells. Alpha cells are going to create the insulin, beta cells are going to create the glucagon. And so, let's say like you get a bunch of like sugar in your blood. What will happen when your body produces, insulin, is it will actually convert that glucose into fat, or maybe it'll store it and convert it into glycogen and store it in your liver or in your skeletal muscle. And then as your glucose levels drop, well, then the glucagon production gets going. I think I said them backwards. Sorry. I said them backwards. Alpha cells are going to create glucagon. Beta cells are going to create insulin. And so your alpha cells are going to release that glucagon, and that will either break down fat and metabolize it for energy, or break down the glycogen and in your liver and muscles to raise your sugar levels back to neutral. But then if you take in food, the process is going to kind of repeat. So we're constantly kind of balancing that out when we're looking at our insulin. If you have a client who has diabetes, it's because either they have a bum pancreas, which isn't creating enough insulin, that would be type 1 diabetes, or they've become resistant to their own insulin, and that's type 2 diabetes, and that's both really dangerous. You get your sex glands, which are going to create like estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, different things like that, which are really great because those are very anabolic for building muscle, particularly testosterone. Men are going to create a lot more of that, which is why men tend to have like larger muscles, because testosterone often results in increased size within our muscles. But make no mistake about it, female clients can get strong. They just don't generally tend to get the size that kind of comes along with it. So that is that's kind of your hormones in a nutshell, guys. I know it's kind of a brief explanation. I know it's not very detailed, but it's not something that we are really qualified to spend a time like working on therapy wise. Like a lot of times, like if your client has like a hormonal problem, like they should talk to their doctor. We know that exercise has general positive effects on hormones, but we don't get quite as specific about it. And that's about it for today, guys. Thomas, Bay, Lorianne, how you guys feeling?
Pretty good. Thank you.
All right. Cool. So tomorrow, I'm excited. We're going to cap everything up. We are going to do the nervous system and the skeletal system and the muscular system together. We are going to be diving directly in to NASM Chapter 2. So get your NASM books ready. We're going to be back to memoirs after that, but this is going to be the actual like filtered NASM specific stuff.
Okay.
Alrighty, thanks.
All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.